You know, one day we'll eventually run out of ideas for isekai. That day may not be today or tomorrow, but with the rate these isekai are being made, it's definitely bound to happen. So, with another season of anime right around the corner, that's a whole new selection of isekai to go over. Mostly the standard power fantasy we've come accustomed to, but also a couple new ones that kinda break away from it. So, as we go through every isekai or fantasy anime that's coming out this spring, perhaps one or two of them may look a little bit interesting to you. Starting things off with the sequels, first we have Konosuba. Not a direct sequel to the main series involving Kazuma, but instead a prequel showing the origins of Megumin. Taking place a year before Aqua and Kazuma even arrive, we get to see how it is Megumin became the master of her ultimate offensive magic. Specifically the life-changing event that made her love it so much in the first place, then her relentless pursuit after to put every possible skill point into it. Now, the first trailer does make it seem a bit more serious than what we're used to, but from what I've read so far, it does seem to have that same comedy that you've come to love from the main series. There definitely are several sad moments regarding Megumin's upbringing, but that doesn't mean there aren't those ridiculous over-the-top comedic moments either. So, if you're looking for a good complementary series to Konosuba, then this is definitely one of the anime that you don't want to miss out on this season. The next isekai that's returning this season is Kuma Bear and Yuna's OP shenanigans in her bear suit. This wasn't anything exceptional when it first came out, but if you found yourself enjoying Yuna's adventures in the in-game world of her VR MMO, then that's pretty much what you'll get in this season. An overpowered girl in a bear costume interacting with now sentient NPCs. An isekai I never thought we'd ever see again is the returning sequel for In Another World with My Smartphone. One of the first parodies of the genre that I honestly believed pioneered the path for all the not-so-great isekai to come after it. Almost like someone in Japan mistook it as a reason to greenlight literally every other isekai in existence. Either way, if you're a fan of this ungodly mix of every isekai protagonist, as well as the way he likes to subvert the usual tropes of isekai, then there'll be more of him in Season 2. It may even look better than the first season since JC Staff is doing it. Now, the other two fantasy returning this season is King's Ranking with a series of special OVA-type episodes and the long-awaited continuation to the Ancient Magus' Bride. King's Ranking is more anime original content adding context to the first season, while Ancient Magus' Bride brings us back into one of the best depictions of fantasy in anime. It's definitely a slower take on the genre, but the way it weaves the more obscure elements of fantasy into its story really does make for quite the interesting series. It's a show I recommend to anyone who's a more well-versed fantasy fanatic. Moving on to the new series now. First we have I Got a Cheat Skill in Another World and Became Unrivaled in the Real World too. An adaptation of a light novel that doesn't really do much to differentiate itself from other isekai. We have a protagonist who's been relentlessly bullied, one day finds a door that leads to a new world, then uses the stuff he finds in it to become OP, turn sexy, and create a harem. Where this series does take a turn though is the way it lets its MC return to the real world whenever he wants. He basically has two lives in which half the story is spent in the real world and the other half is spent in the fantasy one. I'm not quite sure what happens beyond that, but I assume it's fighting monsters in the new world and getting back at his bullies in the old one. Probably adding waifus to his harem in both. Another isekai whose source material unfortunately doesn't have great reviews is Studio L's adaptation of Summoned to Another World for a second time. A series where the MC has already been isekai'd before, then after saving that world he was sent back to the real world, returning as a baby who had to start their life all over again. Fast forward to when he's back in high school, and once again this ex-hero would be resummoned to that same fantasy world he had returned from. Not only keeping all the same powers he had before, but also getting joined by the students he was just in class with. So, aside from our character already having experience in this new world of fantasy, there really isn't much else to make this isekai unique. Now, as much as I'd like to say that these next isekai have potential, unfortunately they too fail to catch my attention as anything other than generic. There's the reincarnation harem Chronicles of an Aristocrat Reborn in Another World, then the comedic fantasy My One-Hit Kill Sister. The first is a teen who dies then reincarnates as the third son of an aristocrat trying to climb the ranks of society. He keeps the same knowledge he had on Earth, all while becoming OP after gaining the protection of the gods. So it's pretty much him hiding his powers while doing the classic nobility stuff. As for My One-Hit Kill Sister, this is pretty much the sister version of that isekai where the mom is the overpowered one. Aside from that, there's honestly not much else to say for it. If you've seen that show, then I'm pretty certain you'd know what to expect from this one. The brother's the weak one and the sister is the one who's extremely overpowered. She also has this massive complex for him. Now, if there was one isekai I had to choose as the one that seemed the most interesting, then it would have to be the comedic ecchi KamiKatsu, working for a god in a godless world. I'm not saying this is leagues above any of the others, but at the very least it has a premise that breaks away from the cookie-cutter style of the other four. Our protagonist is a teen who's raised by these cult leader parents. After getting sacrificed as part of one of their rituals, he's reincarnated into a world where, well, let's just say everyone's a cultured degenerate. It's also a world where the country decides whether anyone lives or dies. So, after getting executed for interfering with one of their decisions, the god of the cult his family followed comes to revive him, resulting in the two doing some interesting shenanigans in the New World. Now, aside from this New World being a truly degen place unlike any setting that we've ever seen before, the reason I say this show has potential is actually because of the absolutely stacked cast behind it. Regardless of whether it's a main character or supporting one, pretty much all of them are voiced by a well-known VA with a highly notable main character under their belt. It's a deceptively stacked lineup that you wouldn't expect to come from an anime like this. Now, the last isekai we have on our list is a villainous type setting in which our protagonist finds herself as a character in one of her romance novels. But unlike how she'd usually be isekai'd as the villainess or the main character, she's instead reincarnated as the side character whose murder instigates the entire story, leading her to try and avoid that fate and change the story. Another series that shows to have a bit of potential is the new reverse isekai by Studio Geek Toys, an adaptation of the manga Deadmount Deathplay. After being backed into a corner by the legendary hero, the corpse god Necromancer finds himself with no choice but to use his reincarnation magic on himself, resulting in him awakening as a regular boy in Japan. I'm not entirely sure what happens after, but from what I've read it's pretty much like Devil as a Part-Timer minus the comedy. Combine that with a story coming from the same person behind Bakuno and Durarara, and at the very least you can expect well-developed characters with multiple intertwining storylines, making this a top candidate to be one of the more interesting anime this season. Now, moving on to just the straight-up fantasy, first and foremost we have Mashle, a series with which if I had to describe in a single sentence I would probably say One Punch Man but with magic. In a world dominated mostly by magic, our protagonist Mash uses pure strength to make up for not having any. He's a dying breed of human that the rest of the world deems as useless. So, in order to get society to accept him, Mash enrolls into a magic academy to show his muscles can compete with even the best of magic, using only his fists to overcome whatever obstacles he may come across. It's not that he defeats his enemies with one punch all the time, but seeing him deflect magic with only his hands does make for quite the comedic action scenes. It's one of those series that takes the single concept it revolves around, then applies it to these increasingly creative and funny situations. So, if you're looking for a show that puts magic against muscles in the most hilarious way possible, then Mashle would definitely be worth checking out for you. The next fantasy on our list is Studio Liden Film's adaptation of the manga The Hero is Dead. Another comedic take on the standard fantasy that places three unlikely companions together in this mission to fight against the Demon Lord. Well, initially that was the job of the hero, but after a perverted farmer accidentally killed him, it's now up to that farmer to shoulder that responsibility now. Of course, he's not even remotely suited to the task, but that's the aspect that makes this series so funny. There's also apparently quite a few plot twists that make the story a bit more interesting. Now, last but not least is the adaptation of the fantasy romance manga, The Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts. A Beauty and the Beast type story in which a girl is sent as sacrifice to the King of Beasts only to be taken in rather than eaten. Where the drama starts to unfold though is through a human trying to coexist with the people of the Beast Kingdom. You see, the king may have this budding romance with the princess, but everyone else isn't as open to peace as they are, leading to a variety of conflicts that spur as their relationship grows. But yeah, that's pretty much every isekai and fantasy coming out this season. I wouldn't say there's anything too spectacular, but maybe a couple could prove to be actually quite entertaining. I'd love to know which ones you plan on watching in the comments. Now, before I go, if you haven't had the chance to check out the Armory desk mats, then you can still get those now using the link in the description. They're a high quality mousepad that takes inspiration from a lot of my favorite anime. Something that's a bit more than just the standard t-shirt. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!